monitoring has two dimensions at the very least. The first one is making sure that what you set up and how you enforce it is actually working, and you understand what exceptions there are, what alerts there are, and so forth. But the other dimension of monitoring means you understand what the threat landscape is.
Okay, I am so glad you're back in part 2 of our conversation, because we're just about to get to the question of how an architect takes into account the changing nature of security. And that's something you don't want to miss. So let's go back to our architects to continue this conversation.
Yes. So David, I want to answer your question specifically because Eric's points are very well made with respect to the complexity of between various environments. Again, let's not just use clouds, call it environments because it's bigger than just clouds.
Sure.
But to your point, monitoring has two dimensions at the very least. The first one is making sure that what you set up and how you enforce it is actually working, and you understand what exceptions there are, what alerts there are, and so forth. But the other dimension of monitoring means you understand what the threat landscape is. You understand what the latest attacks are, and there are obviously tools for that. Vendors like Microsoft and others effectively have the ability to tell you what the threats are as an education, and then obviously their tools are starting to enforce those or build models against it. But as architects, you should understand what the threat landscape is, where the latest attacks vectors are coming from. Like, for example, if you're building software yourself, then you know that the software supply chain is a very favorite attack vector right now. If you're buying hardware, the firmware is a very, very favorite attack vector right now. So you should not trust hardware that gets delivered into your own data center. We certainly don't trust anything that gets delivered into our data centers, and we flatten everything all the way down to the core and stuff like that. So you need to think about what is your situation, what are the attack vectors, and then how do you treat them? Because some of it can be delivered by tool vendors, again, Microsoft or CrowdStrike or whoever you use. But some of it you have to do through process, because, for example, delivering hardware into your data center, you have to go and have a process that flattens the system, including the firmware, only install trusted firmware that you have validated, et cetera, et cetera. And that requires thinking, processes, and execution.
And I'm just thinking to myself that it's also the other monitoring aspect of this is, I mean, just like Eric was talking about role drift, there's presumably threat drift or threat detection drift, right? Because cool that, like, you know, this environment was successfully repelling that kind of attack. But if you have a surface that's multi-environment, is your on-prem going to handle it equally as well? Or is that cloud provider going to handle it equally as well? And that's super fun, right?
Yeah. David, before we go, I think my security friends might throw a shoe at me if we don't mention, the cloud security posture management fabric that needs to exist between multiple clouds. So for the uninitiated, CSPM, it's a set of security tools and practices designed to monitor, detect, and remediate infrastructure, apps, and workloads. So it is kind of like a system of intelligence. And I think Microsoft has one, Defender might be one, Amazon probably has one. But these systems are that fabric that can actually span across clouds and then look for suspicious behavior. They can govern the uniformity of policy across all of these different environments. And so for app architects that are building these solutions, we need to make sure that you have a good understanding of that CPSM system, and then how your application might show up in that system and how it might be subject to and trigger some of those policies, especially in a multi-cloud, multi-environment landscape.
I dig.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I dig the idea of thinking about it as a fabric, because it's really not a bunch of points, right? Like, that's not. If you think about it that way, you're always going to be playing whack-a-mole, and figuring out, these points are cool, but those points over there aren't cool yet. Let's go deal with those. And now I'm back over here again. So, okay. So I guess I want to ask you fundamentally, when it comes from an architect's perspective, what are the things, and this is my last question, that helps an architect sleep at night around security when it's multi-environment? What are the things like they're like, okay, got it. Now I can, now I'm not going to wake up in a cold sweat, every night.
Well, I think you will end up with a cold sweat anyway, because the landscape is very aggressive. It is very changing all the time. However, to get some sleep, you need to understand what your environments are, what the capabilities of each of those environments are, how you create the backbones for identity, for monitoring, for other things, because you can't have that fragmented. You need to think through what is centralized, what's decentralized, how do they work together. Once you understand all that and you have a maturity step in mind with respect to this is the basic model, get it done, then okay, let's go advanced and so forth.
Right.
That is important. And then the other dimension is, obviously, while every enterprise asset is important, some enterprise assets are more important than others. Eric mentioned a couple of times regulated data, but if you think about any company that manages personal identifiable information, you need to have special understanding of, oh, this is the system that manages the customer data, the names and the addresses, whatever we have. If those leak, ooh, that's very bad. So you need to start thinking about your zero trust architecture going beyond just managing the infrastructure. You need to think about, in certain areas for certain data, you need to put extra protection in place. For example, encryption inside the database, because nobody should be able to see the data outside of authorized users, not a database administrator, not a developer, and those kind of things. So it actually goes beyond just infrastructure, which is where ZTA always starts.
Right.
But it now needs to go beyond, and you need to pick and choose your capabilities, databases and others very carefully, especially for PII and other very sensitive data elements.
Yeah, because privacy incidents and security incidents are slightly different and will hurt you in slightly different ways. Eric, you look like you sleep well. Why don't you have the last word about what are the things you think?
Well, yeah, I'm going to build on Uli's point about how to get more sleep, maybe not sleep well.
Okay.
So there's this concept called shift left security, right? And it's don't wait until the last minute to be like, I wonder if my app is actually going to survive a security incident after it's deployed and it has users and people using it. But Microsoft, we used to have the secure development lifecycle. I'm not sure if it's still called that, but that was thinking about security during the requirements gathering phase, the product discovery phase, the architecture phase, the testing phase, the implementation phase, the instrumentation and DevOps telemetry phase. Thinking about security in all of those different phases will help you say, you know what, security is an afterthought. Let me just do the bare minimum to get the security folks to sign off on my app so it can go to production. That's a way to get less sleep.
Okay, well, you've just convinced me that we have to do an episode about the software development lifecycle as part of this. So why don't I thank the two of you for taking some time to talk to us, and thank you all for watching this and joining us here on Armchair Architects as part of the Azure Essentials Show. Join us because we're going to talk about SDLC, and we look forward to seeing you there.